All right, hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of Planning for a Successful Grazing Season webinar series. My name is Janelle Smith. I'm a livestock and feed extension specialist with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture based out of Tisdale. I will be moderating the webinar today. Today's webinar topic is grazing management, getting the most out of your forage. The presenters for this webinar are Cassandra Schroeder, a range management extension specialist based out of Kindersley, and Jason Willaims with DataMars. So before we begin, here's a couple housekeeping notes. If you have questions during the presentation, you may type them in the question box in the bottom right-hand side of your control panel, and we will answer them at the end of each presentation. The presentations are scheduled to take around 25 minutes, leaving time for questions at the end. And the webinar is being recorded, so once we're all done, a link will be sent to all registered participants in approximately 24 hours after the broadcast. So at this time, we will get started with our first speaker. The first topic is stocking density management and fencing funding programs with Cassandra. Go ahead, Cassandra.
Okay. Okay, there. Looks like you can see my screen now and you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, you're good to go.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. So thanks to Catherine and Janelle for having me here tonight. So yeah, I work out of the Kindersley office with Saskatchewan Agriculture. I'm a range management extension specialist. So myself and there's 5 other range management extension specialists are available to help producers with range management. And we also spend a lot of time working in the transitioned community pastures. So tonight I'm here to talk to you about calculating the carrying capacity of your land, which requires an understanding of the animal unit month. Sorry, I'm having some trouble advancing slides there. So before we get into the calculations and explanations about carrying capacity, I just want to revisit the definition of carrying capacity and why it's important. So carrying capacity is the average number of livestock that can be sustained on a ranch or pasture. And this is slightly different than the stocking rate, which is the number of animals that were or are grazed on the land in a year. So the stocking rate can fluctuate quite a bit from year to year, but the carrying capacity remains fairly constant. So most ranchers can probably come up with a rough number of animals that they think their land base can support or that they think a field can support. But fine-tuning this number of animals can be beneficial. It can help with planning and production stability, and it's also important if you're trying to make a drought backup plan. And if you're buying or renting land in a new area, you might not have a good idea of what the carrying capacity of that land is and how many animals you can expect it to support. So knowing your carrying capacity helps you to balance forage supply and demand and prevent overgrazing. So balancing forage supply and demand is one of the most important range management principles. Regardless of your grazing system or style, forage supply and demand needs to be balanced to ensure efficient use of your land base and sufficient feed for your cattle throughout the year. There are many factors that affect both forage supply and demand. Some of the main factors that determine forage production are rainfall, forage species, and soil type. And some of the key determinants of animal consumption are the animal type and weight. So although some of these factors are not easily predictable, particularly rainfall, which happens to be a major contributor to our forage production, we can still use averages and climate data to help with big picture planning. So to compare forage supply and demand, we need to use a common unit. This could be pounds of forage or maybe if you were doing some winter planning. But for our planning, we're going to use the animal unit month. So the animal unit month, or AUM, is really just a volume of forage. So it's the amount of forage that a 1,000 pound cow with calf would need for 1 month. So this is approximately 800 pounds of dry forage. Since your cows probably don't all weigh exactly 1,000 pounds, we'll need to convert them using the animal unit equivalents as shown on the right. So as you might expect, the animal unit equivalents are roughly proportional to the animal weight. And if you need this chart on the right for any of your calculations, this came from the BCRC website, but there's lots of different charts if you just look them up online. And then you may also have heard of the term animal unit day, and you may want to use that. That's simply just 1/30th of an animal unit month. So that would be about 26 pounds of dry forage, or the daily requirement of a 1,000 pound cow with calf. So now we'll just go through a couple of examples of how to calculate forage demand using animal units. So the formula is shown here in orange, but basically we just multiply the head by their equivalent factor and then by the time in months. So for this example, if we have 50 yearlings, they weigh about 800 pounds. So their animal unit equivalent factor would be about 0.8. We multiply that and we get 40 animal units. So that's basically like saying that our 50 yearlings eat as much feed as 40 1,000 pound cows. So if we're looking to graze them for 4 months, then we multiply that by 4 and we get 160 AUMs. So we can use that to compare to how much pasture we have. So this page maybe looks more complex, but it's the same concept. We're just figuring it out for a bigger herd. We multiply the number of animals in each class by their appropriate animal unit equivalent, and then by the amount of time. So if we have 40 cows weighing 1,300 to 1,400 pounds with calves, their animal unit equivalent is 1.3, and we want to graze them for 4 months. We can do that math. We come out to 260 AUMs. The same thing for the yearlings, but I've calculated them out at 3 months because we're only going to have them in the pasture for 3 months. And then if you just have bulls in there for the breeding season, that's just 2 months. We can calculate that out for the amount of time that they're going to be in the pasture. And then if we have some horses in there, we can also calculate this for the horses. There's some other charts that have the animal unit equivalents for horses and other animals as well. So they're still based on that same like 800 pound amount of forage, but they're proportional to what horses would eat, as horses have a bit of a different metabolism than cattle. So the ratio is a little bit different, but it's all figured out for you if you find it in one of these charts. So the horses are approximately 1.25 animal unit equivalents. And then I've also said we're going to take them out of the pasture for 10 days. So we can just, that's basically 1/3 of a month. So we can just divide the days by the month to get the proportion of the month and subtract that from the 5 months. So we have them in there for 4.6 months essentially. So if you're ever wanting to work with days, that's how you would calculate it out. Pretty simple. And then if we add up for this herd, if we add up all the calculations, we come to about a 306 AUM. So for our imaginary herd here and all of the different classes of animals and how long they're going to be in there, we've figured out what our forage demand is. So that's kind of a quick explanation on calculating forage demand. So now to calculate forage supply, Basically, we need to figure out the usable forage production on our land. So there are a few different ways to approach this. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples. The first example is much simpler. It would be useful if you're renting or buying new pasture. You can mostly, if you have enough information, you can do this from your office if you've had a good phone call or something and some maps. The level 2 example would be more useful for fine-tuning the carrying capacity of your land base. These things take a little bit more time and information. So to get into the first level, we need to start with collecting some basic background information on the pasture. So I like to start with a map so I can kind of picture what I'm trying to figure out and then identify if there's unproductive or ungrazable areas that need to be taken out of the calculation. We need to get our acreages and then we need to know the soil zone and soil texture. If it's a new area and you don't know or have that information, you can always use the legal land description to look it up in the soil surveys or call one of our regional offices for help. And then the other thing you need to know is obviously the vegetation types. You need to know if it's tame, native, or is it brush. And then also a general estimate of the condition, whether it's in good condition, is it weedy, has it been overgrazed in the past, just a rough estimate of the condition. And then for tame pasture, you'll also want to know how old the stand is and if it's been fertilized. That'll help you look up the right stocking rate. So using the information that you have collected, then you just look up the stocking rate in some of our provincial references. You can find these online and I'll leave links at the end of the presentation for them, or you could also ask our office and get a printed copy. So now to walk through an example, I have this large field in one of the community pastures. It's in the brown soil zone. The soils are mostly loamy, and I can see that the field is very open. It has about 8 water sources. Some of them are a little bit far apart, but I'm going to assume that with some good distribution management and salting practices that we can pretty much graze the whole field. So I'm going to count the stocking rate for all the acres that are in this pasture. I've also identified some different soil types here. So this purple is a solonitic or poor quality soil. So I'm expecting that the production in this area is going to be lower. And then I also have a map here of there's both tame and native areas within this pasture. So I picked kind of a fun field with a lot of different things going on. So I could show you a few different ways of working through this. So next I delineated the amount of those areas and the acres of each. So we have crested wheatgrass, loamy or medium texture on this kind of purple portion that would be in poor condition because of the soil type. And then we have the rest of the crested wheatgrass areas in good condition. So that's about 1,400 acres. And then we have some native, lots of native in good condition. And then we have some native on this poor quality soil. So then we can look up the stocking rates for each of these categories. So this is available on our Government of Saskatchewan website. We can just look up the appropriate column. So we're in the brown soil zone. We have an old stand older than 7 years and it hasn't been fertilized. So we would expect about 0.4 AUMs per acre. However, I said this was in poor condition or fair condition, I guess. So we would multiply it by a factor of 0.66 in order to account for that. So that gives us 48 AUMs from that area. And then we can calculate for the crested wheatgrass area in good condition. So that would be the same thing using this same chart, except for we don't need to adjust for the pasture condition. So we can work through that, and we have 588 AUMs available there. And then for the native, we're using a different reference here. This one's available from the Saskatchewan Forage Council website. And again, I'll leave the links at the end of the presentation. And so for this native area and we're in this pasture is in the moist area of the brown soil zone. If you look up the whole chart, you'll see there's different charts for each of the soil zones, including the drier area of the brown soil zone and the other soil zones. So we can just look this up. It's in good condition, loamy soil, so they're recommending about 0.28 AUMs per acre. So we can calculate that out to 770 AUMs for that area. And now we could have estimated the poor production on this Solonetzik area using the other reference as well. It's just not quite as precise. This is some newer information, and this is on the PCAP website. It's not as producer friendly, but they do have the forage production calculated for some other eco sites. So this is in the Solonetzik eco site booklet, and for a weekly Solonetzik site, native loamy soil, we would probably expect about 0.626 AUMs per acre, so we can work that out as well. And then obviously we just add those all together, and now we have our animal unit months for this field. So it's important to remember that these stocking rates are based on long-term average production for the forage species, climate, soil type, and pasture condition. And obviously the weather can vary a lot from year to year, and so can the forage production. So these are good numbers for planning, but they're not by any means a guarantee. So you still want to have a backup plan for drought or fire or other disasters. So then if we want to further refine the carrying capacity of an area, there's a few different things we can consider and look at. These take a little bit more time, so they're probably something that you would do on your own permanent land base, and where you have good records and a good understanding of past management. I would suggest determining the recommended stocking rates like we did in the previous example before you do any of these, and that'll give you something to compare to, and maybe you can identify some opportunities to improve range management if you see a large discrepancy in those numbers. So one thing you can do is take some forage clippings from a defined area and weigh them out to determine the actual forage yields. So this is this is enough work. The samples need to be dried first to account for the difference in moisture levels. The litter previous year's growth needs to be sorted from the green or current year's growth so that you're only measuring 1 year's worth of forage production, and then adjustments need to be made for the utilization level, so you're leaving some litter behind and accounting for the forage that would be lost to trampling and defecating. So this method will take some time and effort, but it will give you on-farm measurements for your current conditions. And I won't go into any more detail on how to do this, because if you are interested, the BCRC just developed a nice little producer resource for this, and they have a calculator to help you and some kind of walks you through the instructions and the size and area that you can use. So if you're interested, you can, in trying this, you can check out their website for some help on that. And then this is my favorite way to kind of look at and think about carrying capacity, and that's to look at both the grazing history and the range health condition together. So even if you don't do this formally, this is still a good exercise and a good thing to think about. The other methods that we've discussed so far rely a lot on averages and extrapolation, and but when you look at your pasture condition and the health of your range, and think about your past management, that tells a true story. And however, the downside of this is that it's more reactive than proactive, but it's still really valuable feedback to know if your predictive stocking strategies were accurate, and then you can fine tune them and find what works best for your operation. Now, obviously, good grazing records are essential to this. You probably won't remember as much as you think you will, so it's always a good idea to write it down. So some things you want to keep track of are your grazing days and the animal type, so you can figure out the AUMs, and then consider, you know, the rainfall. And if you're working with tame pastures, think about the fertility and any weed management that you've done, and take note of how much is left for carryover when you take the cattle out, and some basic notes like that. And then range health. Well, range health could be a whole presentation in itself, and there are a lot of resources to evaluate range health, but basically when you're looking at range health, you're looking at the plant species and the ground cover, and you want to see if they're being positively or negatively affected by management. So if you're overstocking, you'll eventually see a decrease in litter cover and an increase in less desirable plants. So those would be plants like pasture sage and weedy species. And then with undergrazing, litter will build up, and eventually the plant species will also shift. So by comparing these indicators, so your plants composition in your litter, and looking at your past stocking rates, you can determine if you're grazing at a fairly sustainable stocking rate or not. So now that we've covered some methods to calculate forage demand and forage supply, I just want to walk through a couple of quick examples of how you can use these numbers to get some useful information. So if you, using our field that we calculated to be 114 AUMs, we can figure out either the head or the months that would be for our herd. So if a pasture manager wanted to graze this field in the community pasture for 50 days with some large cow-calf pairs, how big would the herd need to be? So we can figure this out by dividing the AUMs by our time and animal unit equivalent. So it would work out to about 620 large cows. So he realizes he doesn't have a herd that big. So if he only has 200 cows weighing about 1,300 pounds, then how long should he plan to graze the field? You can also work that out by dividing the animal unit months by the number of head and their animal unit equivalent. So in this case, it'd be 1.3. And then it looks like they would need to be in there for about 5.5 months. So he can pretty much plan on them being in that field for the whole season. So that's an example of how to get some useful information out of your animal unit months. And so comparing forage supply and demand is a great base for the rest of your grazing plan. Some other range management principles that are important to consider in your grazing plan are to provide effective rest periods, distribute livestock pressure evenly, and defer grazing during sensitive periods. So in my mind, those last three things all require some type of rotational grazing with higher stock densities, which requires fences. So I just want to mention some funding that the ministry has available for fencing. There are basically two situations where you can access funding to help with fencing costs. And those are if you have a large amount of native grassland or a riparian area. So the native grassland, you need to have at least 80 acres of native rangeland. And the riparian, you need to have either a stream or a river, or else a water body greater than 60 acres to meet those qualifications. And this is something you want to look into ahead of time, as it will require a health assessment and a grazing management plan before you get started with the project. So there is up to 50% funding up to a maximum of $10,000. So this is if you do have any areas that would benefit from a fencing project like this, any riparian or native areas, this is definitely something to look into. And you can contact the ministry. We have agri-environmental and program specialists that can help you with this. You can reach them at this Agriculture Knowledge Center number, 1866 number. You can also call that number if you have any agricultural questions, and the resource agents will put you in touch with the right specialist. If you want to get a hold of me, my contact information is at the top. And here are the links. So this webinar is being recorded, so you can come back and access these links if you need them. And that is all I had for you folks. I guess questions go in the chat box, and I'll hand it back to you, Janelle.
Great, thanks so much, Cassandra. So we'll start into the questions. In the event that we would run out of time for questions and have to move on to the next presenter, and your question hasn't been answered, we'll make sure that we will answer your question by email. And then at any time, if a question pops up in the next presentation about this presentation, just type it in the email box and we'll make sure it's answered. So for our first question, is there an online calculation tool that can help to simplify this process where you fill in the blanks?
So BCRC does also have a calculation tool, not just for the forage clippings, but also for the other, just to calculate your AUMs using the stocking rates. I haven't played around with that, but yeah, you can definitely check it out and see if it's helpful. Hopefully I explained that well enough that you feel confident doing those calculations, because they're not as bad as I made them look, maybe. I hope, yeah. Hopefully that answers that question.
Perfect. And then another question we have is, I currently charge my patron $1.30 per pair per day. Is there any way to charge by the AUM, and how would this kind of change that?
Yeah, so you could charge per AUM. You could calculate what their demand would be, and calculate what you think you have out there. And that's something I often recommend anyways in rental agreements, kind of to make sure that you're both on the same page with how much is out there to be used, and that you're getting an appropriate use level each year. So I guess how much to charge, you're maybe wondering. The ministry on their leases, they charge per AUM. They charge $8.50 per, or last year it was $8.50 per AUM, but that doesn't, they have more responsibilities in terms of taking care of the lease, so that's not necessarily reflective either. So you'd have to work out what kind of price makes sense for you guys.
Great, so I'll leave about 10 more seconds just to see if any more questions come in, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so that looks about it for now. So thanks very much again, Cassandra. So at this time, we'll move on to our next presenter, which is Jason Willaims from DataMars, talking about fencing tips and tools. All right, You should be good to go, Jason. You might have to turn your mic on there, Jason.
Yes. Am I coming through clearly now?
Loud and clear, good to go.
Perfect. Whoops. Let me turn this light off. Bear with me. Just building a new office, so this is about the 4th webinar in the new office. So thank you for joining. I'm going to shrink this screen. You can see my presentation here. Sorry. All right. How does that look?
Yeah, looks good. We can see your presentation.
Perfect. Are you going to do a brief intro, or do you want me to handle that?
You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, wonderful. I won't take too much time on the gory details, but yes, Jason Willaims. I work for a company known as DataMars Livestock. For years and years, I worked for True Test, that was a manufacturer of some electric fencing companies that we'll briefly touch on here. Tonight, we were purchased by a company called DataMars, and they manufacture the Z-Tag lineup, as you can see, and the NJ Phillips syringes. So we've got quite a lot to do with animal management, but I just want to get right into the fencing side. So let's see why. Go down. There we go. I know this is being recorded. Please take my cell number and or my email down. I'm going to hopefully engage you, leave you with a lot of questions. I'll give you a lot of answers, but fencing cannot be squeezed into a half an hour. I wish it could, but this is what I love to do, love to talk about. I live near Hanley, Saskatchewan. I custom graze a very small amount of usually yearlings, 40 or 50 yearlings, depending on the year. Sometimes cow-calf pairs for a neighbor. And I also travel on the road with DataMars. So that's why I don't have mother cows, because I'm not home to do the work with them. So DataMars North America, really briefly, some flagship lines, of course, of the Z-Tag and the Temple Tag, which is large in the feedlot industry. They bought True Test in October of 2018. So that was from April till August, they were purchasing the NJ Phillips company, which is the syringe line. And yeah, so we just doubled our footprint in North America. And we've got reps, 3 of us across Canada now. And the big lines that we deal with are the Speedrite electric fencing product, which would be our premium line, as well as the Patriot, which is more in a value or economy line of fencing. They will both shock you, and they will both maintain control of your animals and or deter predators. We have a 3-year warranty program on all of our products, even with Lightning. Again, I'm not getting caught up on this. Just want to go right to electric fencing. So, as it says at the top, Jason's favorite topic. I bore my wife regularly with this. My kids are learning. They can answer probably half of your questions because they hear me answer that time and time again. So, I hope my little pointer is still working. 3 components to every electric fence project. Of course, we have the Energizer. This could be a battery powered unit. You could plug that unit in, doesn't really matter. This is where the shock is created and then is pushed down the fence line until a creature comes in contact with it. So the posts, the wire, the insulators, the tighteners, that is a part of your fence itself. So we've got the energizer, we've got the fence, and then the most important is the ground system, ground rods. I spoke to a gentleman today about a fairly large electric fencer. I'll explain all this, but the larger the fencer, the more of these you need. He said, I'll start with one. I said, then you'll have problems. I'll get into that too, but people are really scared to have enough ground rods, and that will solve 87% of your problems. So, okay, how an electric fence works. Shock travels. I hope everyone's speed is fine on the computer, because this is very, 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 very important. I could almost stop after this slide. The shock travels down the fence. When a creature contacts the fence, it runs through the animal into the soil. The soil, it pulls the voltage or that shock back towards the ground rods. Okay, the more ground rods you have, the more efficiently this process happens. Okay, then the ground rods that are connected to the fencer push that shock back to the energizer. Sorry, it's slow connection. I hope we're still going. Once the shock goes back to the energizer, then the cow feels the pain. If you can't understand this, that's the problem. It has to come through the soil back to the ground rods and get pushed back to the energizer in order for her to feel the pain and back away from the fence. This is a very quick process. It takes about 1/3 of a millisecond. Okay, this is called completing the circuit. And if this doesn't happen, the pain won't happen, because I get a lot of phone calls with people saying I have tons of voltage on my wire, on my fence, and the cow walks through the fence. That's because this doesn't happen, okay? So right now we're talking about fencing for spring and summer, because that's the time of year we're in right now. This does not work in the winter. I don't have time to explain that. It's summer right now, okay? So there's a few different types of grounding that we deal with. There's one called an all live. That's the most popular type of fence that's built in Western Canada through the spring and summer. There's one called a live earth return, which has a hot wire and a ground wire. And the third one I don't even talk about on a short presentation like this. It's known as bipolar. We're the only fence company that can build bipolar fence. But second point, larger the energizer and the longer the fence, the more ground rods you will require. Plain and simple, don't shoot the messenger. This changes as the season changes. Right now I planted some trees today. It is quite moist. The ground is wet, okay? Top inch is dry. Underneath there is ground moisture in Hanley, Saskatchewan. So my electric fencer will act differently right now than it will in August when we're in a drought again, okay? So you need more ground rods in August, so you might as well put them in now when the ground's soft. These ground rods have to be 30 to 60 to 100 feet, or however far you want to go, away from your house or shop or barn ground rod. You cannot clip on to the barn. And what you're doing, if you do that, I'm just checking my time, you can interfere with the grounding ability of the building, and you'll start hearing pulses, you'll start hearing crackling on the radio, and you might even get a shock when you touch the barn door. We used to see that a lot in dairy barns. And you go into the milk room and you touch the doorknob and you get a shock because it's going backwards. You're not pushing power onto your fence, it's going in around your house, or your shop, I should say. What we're going to use is a minimum of 6 foot long ground rod. And if you use more than one, put them 10 feet apart. You can join them with insulated cable or uninsulated cable, it doesn't matter. You can just use 12 gauge wire. And you connect the ground rods all in a series and back to the green terminal of the electric fencer. Rule of thumb, use 1 ground rod for every 2 joules of output power, okay? Every fencer that we make is listed in output energy. If it says M36, that's a mains energizer, 36 joules. Don't complain when you might need 18 ground rods. Some people put in 12 and have good luck, but you may need more than that. So, most popular, easiest way to fence in Western Canada right now in April and May is all live ground system, okay? So that means if there's 2 strands of wire, like we see on the fence right here, each one carries power. You can see this, they're connected together. So no matter if her head is down low and she grazes into the wire, if she's up above and tries to lean over the wire, again, the fence, we just learned this, travels through the animal, back to the ground rods, right? Complete the circuit, and she feels pain. Because moist, dark, non-dry soil has good conductivity. So this occurs. All wires are live. If it's August and we're in a drought and the cows are getting out with lots of voltage on the fence because that issue didn't happen, we can change how we build the fence. This here is different right away, okay? Those wires are not connected together now. This is called a live ground return. So we're using 1 wire to aid this process where we complete the circuit, okay? Because the soil she's standing on, and maybe this is snow and ice, right? So that's something we can look at for winter. This process hardly happens. So this is what happens in a drought. Super sandy conditions, this is what you deal with, okay? The voltage doesn't trace back to the ground rod, so we need to use this second wire to do that for us. Again, the pulse goes back into the energizer and is pushed, completes the circuit, and then she feels the shock. She has to touch both wires to make this effective, okay? Testing the ground system. These instructions are on our website. We have multiple websites. It's all the same information, no matter how you find it. If you look on speedrite.com or patriotglobal.com or TrueTest or DataMars, it all routes you to this little page that says testing the ground system. And or if you get our brochure, it's on usually the page 35 or near the back of the brochure. Turn off your energizer. Somewhere down the fence, we need to short the fence out. How do you short out the fence? You can use T-posts or pieces of steel or maybe the bucket of the tractor dug into the ground slightly and tipped up into the fence, and we're actually creating a short in the wire. We're forcing that pulse to run down to where the short is and into the soil so it traces back to the ground rods, because it's easier to come to the ground rods than it is to go further down the fence. Okay, we've created a short. Tree on the fence, broken wire, neighbors stealing power off yours, that's a short. That's why your power goes down, okay? Now we turn the fencer back on in step 3. Check the fence voltage beyond the short, okay? So over here, we check the voltage. It should be less than 2 kilovolts. If it's not, you need more trouble. You gotta short the wire even more till it's less than 2000 volts. Then you go back to your ground rod, the furthest ground rod away from your fence charger, okay? So the furthest ground rod away, you use your digital voltmeter and push the probe in the ground, and you clip the other end to the ground rod, and if it reads higher than 300 volts or 0.3, you need to add more ground rods until this number is 0.3. Again, don't get mad at me because you need ground rods. If you want to keep animals in or predators out, you need to build your fence properly. Simple as that. So we are at 15 minutes. The flow of power. Voltage on your electric fence structure is like water inside of a water pipe. The more strands of the more strands of fence you have, or the larger the water pipe, the easier it is to push power down your fence or water through your water pipe. So what we want to do is basically lay out our pasture, like a power supply or a water supply, but with voltage. We want to power the outside of our grazing paddocks from a perimeter and then draw that into the middle of the fence. Similar to water lines in a feedlot, okay? Use a big tunnel line to move water everywhere, and then a small, 1 or 2 inch line out to the water bowls. So water is the same. If you look at a small garden hose, it's hard to push water through because of the resistance, okay? If you get a blue discharge hose, that's easy to push power through the discharge hose, or water, sorry. So we can move more water with a big hose and a small pump than we can with a tiny garden hose and a massive big pump. Just doesn't work because there's too much resistance, okay? So a single strand is like one small garden hose. If I have a 3-strand fence, again, I'm talking about an all live system. This is not the live ground return for dry conditions. This is in the spring. I have 3 wires on my fence. If I connect them all together, I now make a big diameter power carrying structure. So, little question for you halfway through. Practical fence for long lead outs. We've got 4 beautifully tied off strands, all connected at both ends of the fence structure. Is this a good lead out fence? I would say yes. Very easy to push power through that fence structure. So use the outside to carry the most power. It's easier to troubleshoot because we know if one strand is headed east and one is west. You can use a tester and figure out if one side is lower than the other, which way to walk. It makes for less time troubleshooting for sure. We have a product known as aluminum undergate cable or aluminum lead out cable. This is 6 times more conductive than one single strand of high tensile wire. So where would you use this? Well, if you're building a 4-strand beautiful fence, but you're attaching one power wire to that beautiful fence, and the attaching wire is only 12 gauge steel, you're going to not have much power coming through the supply line, okay? So aluminum undergate cable is like a large supply line to get it away from your fencer onto your fence structure. We lose a lot of power with people not even allowing power to get away from the fencer. The electric fencer itself sits there and it cannot get rid of enough power because people are not using aluminum cable to lead that power away. I'm talking about big, like 6 joule and up fencers. This is for, 5-6 quarters or more of high tensile wire electric. This isn't small projects. If you're doing a small project, just use regular 12 gauge wire, okay? Inside the fence perimeter, if you're new to electric fence, don't overthink it. A lot of the people that have grazed for years or built a lot of electric fence for years, they chase people away from electric fence because they say, oh, you need to increase your stocking rates and you move your fence twice a day and it blows people's minds because you're creating more work. I'm worried about the grass, okay? Maybe you just need one cross fence. You run one single wire across a pasture. Good, that's a start. Next year, you can cut those both in half again. Now you have 4 pastures instead of one big one, okay? Don't power your cross fencing from both ends. Just hook it onto one edge of your supply line and feed it one direction. It's easier for troubleshooting. If you have to cut hay and do things in the summer like everyone does, probably don't have time to move your cattle 3 times a day. So don't fence like you need to do that. Like, I don't like these grazers that point a finger at folks that might calve early because they're busy for a month or 6 weeks in February and early March. And then this guy that calves in May is busy for 150 days straight moving cattle 3 times a day. Like, don't point fingers. But maybe you want to do that. That's great. So I just want to make sure that cattle don't, they do the work for you, okay? So try to be flexible. If you're planning holidays, you can, 3rd week of July, well, make sure they have extra room. You don't need to move them every 3 days. Give them 9 days worth and then take a holiday, okay? So if you can build an alleyway, say 30 feet wide to lead up to a water source and then back out to different grazing paddocks, you're gonna increase your utilization of those paddocks, okay? Again, I could talk about this for 7 hours and still would keep talking. So contact me, I can show you how to lay out pastures. Don't lay them out like a wagon wheel. Tremendous overgrazing around the water source, and the far edges of that wagon wheel don't hardly get grazed at all. So very inefficient use of food source. But one thing to think about. So if this is a quarter of land, perfect square, half mile by half mile. If your electric fencer is at the yard here and you push power in one direction and have it come all the way back to where the fencer is, that shock actually has to travel 2 miles, okay? Half a mile, that's 1 mile, 2 miles to get all the way around. And what people will notice is that right here, we're really lacking power by the time it gets back, okay? Take the same piece of land and you push power to the west and you push another strand of power to the east, but you stop the power here and you stop the power there. I'm just going to move this, sorry. You only need to push the power half as far, okay? You're making the fencer work half as hard. In any given distance, the most it has to push the power is 1 mile. So it's like a water pipe full of water. If you have a water pump at one end and you push water for a mile and take a maybe a PSI reading at the very end, you can get a PSI reading. If you take the same pump and the same size pipe and you put the pump in the center of the water hose and you push water a half mile each direction, you'll have higher PSI at either end because it's only working half as hard. Tube is full, right? The water tube is full. So keep that in mind. Just how you build your fence can save you a headache. Training of livestock has to be done now. It's wet, it's mucky. The grass is, we got a bit of a rain here yesterday, so very, very conductive. The soil's in good shape. Do it in spring and summer so that in the winter, we're relying on some mental memory of fencing, and if it hurts them through the spring and the summer, they'll quit pushing on it and you'll have better retention in the winter. I guess I don't know, I was feeling smart alecky right here, should end the talk there. But really, I want to make sure every time they come in contact with the fence, we want them to feel a shock. Because if we have a day, maybe you have a lightning strike, or maybe the power went out, or your battery goes dead because we didn't check it enough, or something happens and the power is down on the fence, I mentally want them to think that it might hurt them if I try it. So I'm just going to eat the grass that's in front of me, not going to push on the fence. So we want to train them mentally to stay away from the fence and we're going to use good ground to enhance this training. So now I just have some pictures to look at, a few do's and don'ts. This is a very nice, well-built corner system. I see this a lot. I travel most every day. Now I'm locked down in quarantine. I haven't been traveling, but I drive by hundreds of corner posts that are tilted in because they don't build a large enough H-brace. Twice the height of your post is the length of your H-brace. So this post is out of the ground 4.5 feet. This should be 9 feet, not 5 feet, okay? 2 fences. We are looking at, this is across the road from one another. This is outside of Kenniston, Saskatchewan. They're both well-built fences. They both have cattle in. I know where they bought the product. They paid, one guy paid about 3 times more than the other fellow. They both contain cattle. What's the difference? This post spacing is almost 100 feet. This is 20 feet, okay? More insulators, more posts. This guy paid 3 times as much to do the same job as his neighbor across the street, okay? 1/3 of the cost. Think about that. It doesn't need to be tight. It's supposed to be loose and saggy. Like me in quarantine, loose and saggy. Try and not just wrap your wires together, try and use a joint clamp. The wind will separate these, and every once in a while the pulse will stop, and at that second, that's probably when the cattle climb through. Try and use good insulators. This gives almost a full inch between the wire here and the post. This one arcs through and shorts out, doesn't work. This is a really bad picture. I apologize. Of a standoff insulator. This is another version of it. That's 2.5 inches. This unit is about 1 foot. Okay, that's a nice clean corner. Corner insulators. This one, again, we're wrapped in barbed wire. There's things happening. Just try and be conscious of where you might be losing some power. This again is just wrapped around. I don't know where this was going or what, but it was sure arcing across. You could see that. You could really see it at night as well, and you lose a lot of power that way. I'm gonna skip over that one. Again, here's a good corner. That is 12 feet. Those posts are almost 5 feet tall out of the ground. So 2 times that should be 10. I think that brace was actually about 12. That's a proper brace. Little floating brace. And we could, I can probably stop anytime. No, here we go. Last point I want to make, okay? If you're using multiple strands of wire, people ask me how far apart to spread the wires. Whatever animal you're keeping in or out, we want to space from the nose to the eyeballs of that critter. If you're worried about coyotes and sheep, that's why you're fencing like 3 or 4 inches apart. It's not for your lambs. The lamb's not going to go too far from mama, okay? It's for predation. So if you're grazing yearlings, you're probably 10-inch spacings. Other cows, maybe 12. Horses, 14 to 16-inch spacings, okay? Nose to eyes. Yeah. Again, temporary fence, we've got permanent fence. No time to talk about the differences. I think we can assume what's going on there. And that's a knot that I will explain to you. I'm gonna make a little video, put it on probably Instagram or something like that. I can email that to you, how to tie this knot. You can use crimp sleeves as well. That's the crimping tool. It just holds the wire from pulling apart. Tighteners, you can use the inline tighteners or spring clip style tighteners. They both do the same job, okay? So probably quite a bit over time. Do I keep going, ladies? I shouldn't have too many more slides. Just let me know what your thoughts are, or I could end it there and everyone can talk to me later.
If you've got 5 more minutes of material, I think that's fine. It's really helpful stuff.
Okay, perfect. So on the voltmeters, we sell a variety of these. So we try to cater to the person with 2 goats or 28,000 mother cows like we have with the Seminole tribe in Florida. Okay, so we can handle anything. The little 5 light testers that we sell for 30 bucks aren't enough. People buy them by the boatloads. They don't tell enough of a story. We need, at the far end of our pasture, we need 2,500 volts to keep cattle in. Sheep, goats, those critters go, the needs go higher. Okay, that's at the far end of our pasture. They don't escape by the house or the barn. They're going to get away in the end. So the number climbs as the animals get smaller, basically. What I'm talking about here, and my picture didn't upload, sorry about this, but so we sell a product called digital voltmeter. Digital voltmeter has a brass probe and it has a clip on the other end. So we push the probe down into the soil and you clip the clip onto the 12 gauge wire. That does not replicate a hoof of any animal that we see on Earth. No animal sticks its foot 4 inches in the ground, okay? So a more accurate use of a voltmeter like that would be to just lay the brass probe on the top of the ground and gently step on it with your boot and then clip it on the wire. And it'll be a drastically different reading, but that's really what the cattle feel, okay? So it's just more accurate. So we make the digital voltmeter. We have a directional fault finder that helps you actually figure out where your problem lies. And then we have a 3-in-1 tool that will turn off. We've got 4 models of fencer that you can turn on and off with a remote control. But anyways, how to build a gate. Here's a simple gate. We call it a spring gate. It is an electrified spring. You need to pass through with a tractor often. You can just unhook that and it snaps out of the way. A lot of people build these. This is called a tape gate. You can see here power is fed from the fence over to the activator plate, and when the handle hooks into that, it electrifies the gate itself. Cutout switches are basically like a light switch. If you want to stop the power, open the switch. Very simple for fault finding because you can stop power in one direction and just worry about the other side of the fence. Fencing will protect and deter animals. We have to worry about predation as much as animal containment. And just skipping through, let's end it there. Again, Jason is my name. That's my phone number. Email me anytime. Text, phone, whatever you need. I do a lot of ranch calls. I do seminars for groups, and we can help you through your problems. So if there's any questions, let's see what we have.
Great, thank you very much, Jason. The first question we have is, would you do a site visit for planning out a new pasture?
Yes. I can't always get there the next week. And corporately, my new corporate office is in Limone, Switzerland, which is right above Italy, which is having a lot of COVID issues right now. They don't want us traveling to a ranch anytime before probably mid-June. But I do a lot of that. I analyze a lot of aerial photographs of different plots of land so we can lay out where the water sources are. Give some suggestions on which directions to send power or where to pull the power from and how to split those paddocks off for the most even grazing that we can get for them. But definitely, yes, please contact me.
Perfect, and I'll just wait a few more seconds for any other questions that come in for Jason. Sure. But in the meantime, Cassandra just wanted me to add in, if you, pertaining to the question about a cost per AUM compared to a cost per pair.
Yes.
So you would take your cost for per the pair per day, so in the case it'd be $1.30 times 30 days in a month would equal $39 for a month. And then you
Yeah.
just convert that. So for a 1,000-pound pair or 1 AUM, that would be $39 per AUM. And then if you have 1,300-pound cows, for example, that would be $30 per AUM. So then you could just use that animal unit equivalent
Perfect.
to that into what you need.
Yes, because I'm do better with yearlings than when if these send calves that are born February, March, or sorry, January, February, you know, they're eating by the end of summer as much as probably a yearling. So anyways.
All right, so we got one more question here. Can your units be powered by commercial solar power?
By commercial solar power. Yeah, so most of our units, except for one that is sold in Canada, come with they're ready to be powered 12 volt. There's got to be 12 volt. They're not 24 volts, so they've got to be. Some people run them off of their existing pasture watering systems. That can definitely work. It's a form of power. You can tap into it. What scares me about that is if you have 6 or 8 miles of electric fence, that's an 8-mile lightning rod. It's all going to drive right back to your watering system and blow your pump, and then your animals are out of water. So I would recommend have a separate system for solar, but most all of our fencers will run solar or plug-in. And they have the attachments to do that included in the boxes. And a good rule of thumb with our products is if you have a 6 joule fencer, you need a 60-watt panel to graze through the summer. So it is, 10 times the joule power is how many watts you're going to need to run that. We've got some large battery. We've got like an 18 joule battery unit that requires 180 watts of panel. Panels aren't that cheap. It uses a lot of power, and you'll go through a fully charged 12 volt RV battery in 3 days on an 18 joule fencer. So think about that when you're running on the solar side, but it's very possible. It's a large portion of our business, but yeah, just use 10 times the joule to figure out how many watts of panel you might need.
Perfect. All right, so in the interest of time, I think we'll wrap it up there. If anyone has any further questions about these topics, please feel free to contact Cassandra, Jason, or myself. For any other agriculture related questions, please contact in your Saskatchewan Agriculture Regional Office or call the Ag Knowledge Center at 1-866-457-2377 or visit the website at saskatchewan.ca/agriculture. So at this time, I would like to thank everyone for joining us for the webinar, and a very special thanks to Cassandra and Jason for presenting. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks for having me.